Pretty soon we'll be able to build an e-commerce store. Now let's build daily interaction number 34. Hey, what's up everyone? John with WebDev for you, and welcome to the daily interaction series, where every weekday we build a new interaction or animation in Webflow. So today we're going to be building a menu trigger animation on click. So here in the demo, when I click on this menu trigger, we see it rotates and the first line and the third line rotate as well to create the X. So this is a bit more interesting than just having a static icon. With this, you can have a nice animation for the menu trigger that lets users know that they can open and close the menu. So here, when I click again, it turns back into the kind of the hamburger icon, and I close. It turns into an X, and it lets users know that they can close the menu. All right, so this is what we will be building today. To view more daily interactions and premium content, visit webdevforyou.com. Also, be sure to subscribe below to receive a notification every time there is a new daily interaction. Okay, so here I have a blank Webflow project, and we'll start with the daily interaction class naming convention. So it's the daily interaction number, so today is 34, and then the element. So every element on the site will have a D-34 in front of it, and this is for consistency purposes, and so that we know we're working with daily interaction number 34. So first, we're going to build out all the elements for the menu trigger, so the menu trigger and the lines inside of it, and then we'll add the on-click interaction. So yeah, on click it turns into an X, and then the second click will have the reverse animation. Okay, so the first thing I'll do here is add an element, and I'll add a section, and I'll give it the class name D-34 section. And for the height, I'll set it to 100 VH, or viewport height, so it spans the full height of the viewport, and it will be the full width as well. All right, and for this, I'll give it a display setting of flex, horizontal, justify center, and align center. So anything I place within this section will be in the center. The next thing I'll do is I'll add the menu trigger. So I'll add an element, I'll add a div block, and I'll give it the class name D-34 menu trigger. So this is going to be kind of a wrapper as well. The lines are going to go inside of this div block, but this is what the user will click on to have the animation occur. So here we have the menu trigger, and for this I want to give it a display setting of flex. I want to set it to vertical, and I want to say justify space between. So I'll click right here and align stretch. So again, yeah, justify space between and align stretch. And this is because we're going to have 3 lines inside of this menu trigger, and I want them to all have equal spacing vertically. So in the demo, we see we have 3 lines and they're equally spaced vertically. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is give a specific width and height to this menu trigger. So I'm going to give it a width and height of 100 pixels by 100 pixels. So there we go. I'm making it fairly large for this demonstration so we can clearly see it, but later on we can change the size of it as well so it's not as large. Okay, so 100 pixels by 100, and that's all I have to do for the menu trigger. So now we want to place the lines inside of it. So for this, I'll add an element, and I'll add a div block. Yeah, so with the menu trigger selected, add a div block, and I'll call this D-34 line-1. So let's quickly go to the navigator just to see the structure of the site. So we have the body, we have the section, we have the menu trigger, and inside of the menu trigger we added line 1. So if you're not sure what you're selecting, you can go in the navigator and kind of select the different elements. So yeah, in the menu trigger we added line 1, and for line 1 I'm going to give it a width of 50% and a height of 10 pixels. right? Because in the demo, the first and third line are half the size of this second line. So we want to set the width to 50%, 10 pixels, and I'm going to give it a background color of blue here. Okay, so there we have line 1. The next thing I want to do for line 1, I want to go to transitions and transforms, and I want to set the transform origin to the right. Okay, so if we go to the demo and click, notice that this first line is rotating from the right side. So let me click again, and I click, so it rotates from this, the right side here. So in transitions and transforms, I want to go here to transforms and click on this gear icon. And here for the transform origin, I'm going to say to the right, center right here. So it's kind of like that hinge effect. So as it rotates, it's rotating from the right side, and then it will snap to the center of the second line. So it'll just rotate from the right side. Okay, so there we have line 1. Now let's add line 2. So I'll go to the navigator, I'll select the menu trigger, I'll add another div block, and I'll give it the class name d-34 line-2. And for this, we don't have to set a width because it's going to expand the full width of the of its parent element, which is the trigger wrapper. So it'll automatically be 100 pixels in width because the parent element has a flex setting of align stretch. So it'll just stretch the width of the menu trigger. But we do want to give it a height, so I'll give it a height of 10 pixels. And again, I'm going to set the background color to blue. Okay, so we have the second line. We don't need to set a transform origin because this line is going to rotate with the menu trigger. We're not actually rotating it individually, but the first and second line are rotating individually, so we do need to add a transform origin to it. All right, so let's add the third and last line. So I'll select the menu trigger here in the navigator, add an element, I'll add a div block, and I'll give it the class name d-34 line 3. Okay, and for this I also want to set the width to 50%, and I want to set the height to 10 pixels, and I'll give it a background color of blue here. So here I'll select blue, and we notice it's on the left side. We want it to go to the right. So here where it says flex item, it is a flex item because the parent element or the menu trigger has a display setting of flex, so this becomes a flex item. So here I can select override alignment, and rather than having it align self stretch, I can say align self end, so it moves to the right. All right, so there we have the menu trigger, we have the 3 lines. So we have all the elements that we need to create the interaction. All right, so let's go to the navigator and take a quick look. So menu trigger, line 1, line 2, and line 3. All right, so I want this to occur, this interaction to occur when I click on the menu trigger. So in the navigator, I'll select menu trigger. I'll go to interactions here in the upper right. I'll select element trigger. I'll click the plus, and I'll select mouse click or tap. So this is going to occur when we click or tap on the menu trigger. So on first click, we're going to start an animation. We're going to add a new timed animation. So I'll click the plus, and I'll call this d-34 first click. Okay, so on first click, the first thing I want to occur is I want the entire menu trigger to rotate -45 degrees. So it'll rotate counterclockwise, and all the lines will be at an angle. And then I want the first and third line to rotate. And one thing we didn't do for the third line, so we'll do it really quick. So I'll select line 3 here. I'll go back to styles. We want line 3 for the transform origin, so I'll select transforms, click the gear icon. We want the transform origin for this one to be on the left. If we go to the demo and we click, we notice that this third line is rotating from the left, and from the right side here, or it looks like the right side, but it's actually the left if we look at it from the original position. So the transform origin is here on the left. So here for transform settings, we'll set it to the left. All right, so yeah, let's go back into the interaction. So I'll select the menu trigger, go into interactions, select mouse click or tap, select the first click. So we're going to rotate the entire menu trigger -45 degrees. So yeah, in the navigator, select menu trigger, then I'll add a new timed action. I'll say rotate, and let me just do this real quick to have a bit more real estate. Yeah, so here for the rotate, we'll rotate it on the Z axis because we want it to rotate counterclockwise. We don't want it to rotate vertically or horizontally. So we're rotating it on the Z. So I'm going to rotate it -45 degrees. And for the easing, I'm going to say ease in out expo. You can select any easing you'd like for this animation, but I find ease in out expo has a nice snappy animation to it. And the duration of 0.5 is okay as well. So now I'll preview. If I click, the menu trigger rotates -45 degrees counterclockwise, and so all the lines are slanted. So now I want to rotate the first and third line. So I'll go to the navigator, select line 1, and I'll add a new timed action, and I'll say rotate. So I'll select rotate here, and for this I want to rotate it counterclockwise on the Z, so it rotates, yeah, not vertically or horizontally, but counterclockwise, and I'll say -90 degrees. So we can see it rotates -90 and it snaps into the center line. And again, I'll set the easing to ease in out expo, and a duration of 0.5 is okay. So now I'll do the same for the third line. So I'll select line 3, go into interactions, add a rotation, select rotate, and I'm going to also rotate this -90 degrees. So the transform origin is on the left, so we went back and changed that, and then we're rotating it counterclockwise -90 degrees. And the easing, I'll say ease in out expo, and a duration of 0.5 is okay. And I do want to click, hold, and drag and place this on top of the first line so they start at the same time. So the menu trigger is going to rotate. Line 1 and line 3 are going to rotate in at the same time to create the X. So now I'll preview, and I click, rotate, and it looks good. So you might be noticing this second line, or this middle line, is longer than the first and the third line. So what happens when we rotate the lines, they actually move down 5 pixels, or yeah, they move up or move down 5 pixels. I'm not exactly sure the math behind this, but I think as it rotates, it's just, moving the lines. So what we want to do is move those lines a little bit as well as it's rotating. So after some experimentation and working with this, I figured out that you want to move the first and third line half the size of its height. So here, if I go into the navigator and I select line 1, we gave it a height of 10 pixels. So we want to move this first line up 5 pixels as it's rotating, and the bottom line, we want to move it down 5 pixels as it's rotating. So depending on the height of the line, you want to move it half that amount within the timed action. So here I'll go back into the interaction, and we'll select the first click. So as it's rotating, I'll select line 1 here in the timed action. Because it's here, we can select it, and I'll add a new timed action. I'll say move, and we'll move it vertically on the Y. So as it's rotating, it's also moving up -5 pixels. So here on the Y, I'll say -5, and for the easing, I'll say ease in out expo. A duration of 0.5 is okay, and I'll click, hold, and drag and place it on top of the other timed actions so they all start at the same time. Then I'll select line 3. Again, I'll select move, and I'll move it down 5 pixels on the Y. So yeah, as it's rotating, they're just moving a little bit, so they become as long as the middle line. Okay, so we're moving it 5 pixels down, so I'll select 5, easing of ease in out expo, and I'll just move it, click, hold, and drag, so it starts with the rotations here as well. So now if I preview and I click, perfect. So the middle line and the first and third line are the same length. So yeah, it's just a quick note there. You do want to move it the first line we moved it up half the size of the height, which is 5 pixels. So we moved it up -5, and the bottom line, as it was rotating, we moved it down 5 pixels as well, so they become the same height as the middle line. All right, just a kind of a bit of math there and a bit of working with, calculating the rotation and the movement of those lines. All right, so the last thing we need to do is add the second click. So on second click, we want to just create the reverse animation. So here I'll close this, and on second click, we'll start an animation. We'll duplicate the first click. So I'll click on these 3 dots, and I'll say duplicate. Then I'll select D-34, first click to, and I'll click on it, and I'll rename it here to D-34 second click. So for this, we just need to bring all the values back to 0, so it goes back to its original position. So for the menu trigger, rather than a Z value of -45, we'll say 0, so it rotates back to its original position. And then line 1, we'll rotate it back to 0. Line 3, rotate it back to 0 on the Z. Then we'll move line 1 back to 0. And line 3, we'll move it back to 0. So it just goes back to its original position. So now I'll preview, and I click. It rotates, the first and third line close in, click again, and it goes back to its original position. All right, looks good. So yeah, probably the most important thing to remember is moving the first and third line as it rotates, half the size of the height. So yeah, looks good. Yeah, that's pretty much all there is to it. The last thing I'll do here is I'll select the menu trigger. Yeah, here in the navigator, select menu trigger. And for the cursor right down here, I'll change it to a pointer so the user knows that they can click to have the interaction occur. All right, looks good. So we could link this out to like a full screen menu. So let's do that really quick. So I'll go into the navigator, I'll select the body, and I'll add a div block here. And I'm just moving a bit quick so this video isn't too long. I'll give it the class name D-34 menu wrapper, and I'll give it a position of fixed and full. So it fills the entire viewport and stays fixed within the viewport. And I'll give it a background color of something like, let's see, what's a good background color here? Yeah, we'll do this plum color. And I'll go into the navigator, select the menu trigger to bring it to the front, select it here. Yeah, go into styles. I'll give it a position of relative so we can play with the Z index and bring it to the front. And I'll give it a high Z index of something like 99. So that menu trigger comes to the front. And now I'll select we'll go back into the interaction. So I'll select the menu trigger, go into interactions, select mouse click here. And on the first click, we'll select the menu wrapper, go back into interactions, add a new timed action. I'll say move, and I'll move it on the X horizontally. We'll move it -100%. So that menu wrapper goes all the way to the left and we don't see it. And then here for timing, I'll set it as the initial state, so we don't see it initially. And then here, what I'll do with the menu trigger, after the menu trigger, I'll add another timed action. I'll say move, and we'll move the menu wrapper back to 0% and give it an easing of, ease in out expo. And I'll start this menu wrapper with the rotation of the menu trigger. So if I preview and I click, the wrapper comes in and it turns into an X. So I kind of like that motion, looks good. And then on the second click, we just need to bring the menu wrapper back to -100%. So here on second click, I'll select it, and I'll add a new timed action. And actually, let me make sure I have the menu wrapper selected here in the navigator. I'll add a new timed action. I'll say move, and I'll move it on the X-axis, so it moves horizontally, -100%. And I'll click, hold, and drag to start it with the rotation of the lines, with the rotation and the movement of the lines. And I'll change the easing to ease in out expo, and that's it. So we click, the menu comes in, click again, the menu flies out. So as those lines are going back to its original position, the first and third, the menu is moving, so it's like a snappy and nice animation. All right, looks good. So yeah, and the last thing I can do is make this menu trigger smaller. So here I'll select the menu trigger. I'll place it in the upper right, so I'll set it to a position of absolute and select top right so we can move it to the right. And then for the width of the menu trigger, let's do something like 50 by 50, and 50 pixels by 50 pixels. And let's change the height of the lines. So I'm going to change the height to 5 pixels instead of 10. So I'll select each line here in the designer and set it to 5. So this means we need to go back into, let me add some top and bottom margin of like 50 and 50. So this would mean we need to change the values for the trigger. So if I click, they're going to be kind of off there a little bit. So let's go back into the interaction. And for the movement, so half of 5 is 2.5. So here on the Y, for the movement, we'll just change it to 2.5. So line 1 is negative 2.5, and line 3 is 2.5. All right, so again, half the height. The height is 5 pixels for the line, so half of 5 is 2.5, and that'll give us the same length for that middle line for the first and the second line, the first and third line as they become an X. All right, so that's all we have to do there, and I can close the interaction. So now when I preview, we have the menu trigger here in the upper right. I click, rotates, turns into an X. I click again, and goes back to its original position. All right, looks good. So that is it for daily interaction number 34. If you have any questions about anything I went over, feel free to let me know in the comment section for the video or in the forum section in the members area. All right, looks good. So let's go back to the demo. So here we have the demo, the menu trigger animation on click. Looks good. All right, so to view more daily interactions and premium content, visit webdevforyou.com. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next daily interaction.